The topic that we're looking at is actually, it's a topic that comes up in the Gemara of Rosh Hashanah in chapter 3, which is something that we covered on the app, but we don't have a chance to look at it in depth. And that was really thinking about this question of intent. Does intent matter when one is performing mitzvot? Now, if I just asked you that question without knowing anything, do we care about a person's mindset when they light candles on a Friday night, when they sit in a sukkah? Does it matter to us if they just happen to be lighting candles absentmindedly, if they just happen to sit in a sukkah and eat a sandwich, without even knowing it was Sukkot, or they didn't care it was Sukkot? What does your instinct tell you about the role of our internal mindset, our feelings? And you're free to unmute yourself and answer.
It matters.
Why should it matter?
That's a whole other thing.
Right? I mean, intuitively, does everybody agree with that statement? If somebody gives you a hug, do we care when they're giving you the hug what their internal mindset is when they're giving you that hug?
You'll feel it.
Okay,
it
might even translate in the experience, right? You ever had an experience where somebody gives you a warm hello, then they realize it's mistaken identity? Right?
Well, it's
hug so
and
deflating.
Ouch.
Like if someone looks so excited to see you, then they're like, "Oh, it's you." I thought it was somebody I wanted to see. You're like, "Oh, come on, I'm worthy of a good hello," right? So our internal mindset, I would argue, we sort of intuitively believe it matters a lot in almost all the things we do, whether it's how we treat our friends or our loved ones. In all areas of life, right, external behaviors count, but we also know that external behaviors are only a piece of the story, right? In other words, what makes external behaviors meaningful for many of us, I think, is what we assume to be the emotional content behind the gesture, right? If I buy my wife flowers for Shabbat, and I did it, simply because I don't want her to be mad at me if I forget, versus really thinking about it, even if she doesn't sense the difference, I know the difference, right? And so I think that there's a whole world of our internal feelings that we would argue matters. Yes, is somebody something to say? Somebody had a hand up? Yes,
if I may just add a quick thing, thank you. I don't know how God reckons intention or not, but it occurs to me that something very moving that the late Dean Steinsaltz, Zichrono Livracha, said is actually perhaps is relevant in an odd sort of way. He was very accepting of different levels of observance and of people coming from very different places. And he said something like this. The gist is correct, even if the example I'm giving isn't exactly the case. But he said, if somebody eats a hamburger on Yom Kippur, it's a timely example, but doesn't have milk with it, or doesn't make it a cheeseburger because he thinks that's wrong Jewishly. So oddly, in that kind of fractured observance way, you definitely know there's intention, even if it's an intention affecting that partial observance, but it's actually an absolutely, if you know that that's why he didn't buy a cheeseburger or have milk with it, then there really was intention. So I'm just putting that out there.
And that behavior was an awareness of something. The external behavior reflected an internal state of mind, as opposed to somebody who had no intention of fasting on Yom Kippur, but locked themselves in their bathroom. Right? They're about to go out Yom Kippur night. They lock themselves in their bathroom before Kol Nidre, and the next time they're let out is after Yom Kippur is over. They fasted on Yom Kippur, hooray. Right? But in terms of their internal mindset, we could argue it wasn't present. I'll take one more comment, then we're going to get into it. Yes.
All right. So I was just going to suggest maybe, and I can't defend the locked in the bathroom, but maybe like lighting candles on Friday night. And I'm very rushed this week, and I'm really not in the mood for Shabbat coming. I really have a lot more to do. But if I just light those candles, because I know I'm supposed to, it may actually lead me to feeling it. So if I'm eating my sandwich in the sukkah, I may not really enjoy, appreciate I'm in my sukkah, but once I'm sitting there eating it, my mood and my mindset may change because of doing that.
Hold that thought. And there's no doubt, just to build on what you just said, there's a whole range of attitudes or feelings that we could bring to all the behaviors that we're engaging. And I don't mean to imply it's a one size fits all. The question is, on the legal level, does Jewish law really care? And intuitively, we probably would have argued, I'm just going to share my screen with you very quickly. Without knowing anything else, I would have intuitively thought that, of course, kavannah matters. I'll just give you one verse among many others, which says, and now, Israel, what does the Lord God demand of you? Only this, to revere the Lord your God, right? Fear God, to walk in his path, to love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. Meaning, it would seem that, of course, as human beings in a relationship with God, our internal mindset and our feelings matter, right? Part of being a committed, connected Jew is not only a set of behaviors, but we would have assumed it also includes a set of intentions, of feelings, of mindset. And I would have expected the same thing all the way through. Let's take a look at one more source together, source 2, before I send you off in a chavur to look what the Gemara did. The Mishnah says as follows: and also one who was passing behind a synagogue, or if his house was next to the synagogue, and he heard the sound of the shofar or the Megillah being read. Right? A passerby. He's not even going to shul. He happens to live next door to the shul, and he can't drown it out. He hears the shofar. He hears it. Just like many people, residents in Jerusalem throughout the month of Elul in the morning, hear the shofar being blown. Now, the Mishnah says, if he directed his heart, if he had intention, then he has fulfilled his obligation. But if he's not, he has not fulfilled his obligation. Even though this one heard and this one heard, this one directed his heart and this one did not. It would seem on a pshat, on a simple level, the Mishnah is saying, even at its most basic level, in order to fulfill a commandment, in addition to the behavior, you minimally need the intention to fulfill the commandment. The behavior on its own is not sufficient. You need some level of intent. I'm not suggesting the Mishnah is talking about this elite, spiritual, mystical oneness with God, but you can't just be a passerby. You have to hear those sounds of the shofar with the intention of hearing and fulfilling the commandment, which I would argue would seem to make, on the most basic level, the most sense. However, there are two pieces of Talmud here, which I'm going to let you have a chance to look at. One from tractate Rosh Hashana, and one from tractate Pesachim, which suggests an opposite view. And the question that's really worth thinking about is why? Why would the Gemara be interested in lowering the bar? That's what I'd like you to think about as you look at this. How do we understand why would the Gemara push against what the Mishnah seems to lay out as something very basic and obvious, that intention matters, and seek to take intention off the table? So that's our job for the next 40 minutes or so, or 35 minutes or so. And then we're going to discuss these sources together. So, Shani, you want to break people up into Chavruta partners? Leslie and Mark might be their own team, unless they want a third one. Up to you guys.
We're good, and we're happy to welcome in a stranger as well.
Wow, that is a very beautiful Jewish ethos.
Thank you.
You are welcoming the stranger. Good for you. All right, Shani, you're on it?
Yep, here we go.
All right, everybody should have access to the source sheet. Don't get too hung up. If the Gemara seems very, sharply complicated, the goal is just sort of to get the general idea, to see why an opinion pops up that says, you know what, intent doesn't matter? That's going to be the question that we're going to tackle and think about how that might relate to Rosh Hashanah in particular. And the question that emerges from reading this piece of Gemara is why Shmuel's father, Rava, why the Gemara itself is intent on defending a position that seems to be so basically religiously objectionable, which is the idea that behaviors without any intent at all, or at least the intent to perform the mitzvah, should count. Why would the rabbis defend that position? Thoughts? Yes, Sally.
I talked about it before. I think that fulfilling obligation is a twofold thing, and it's a societal thing. And I think they want to keep society together, and they don't want everyone to be like sheep and follow along, but they want everybody doing the same thing. So if you're in a group and maybe 8 have intent and 2 don't, if you're talking about a minyan, you're all performing your obligation together.
Okay, hold that thought. Right, kavannah can create tears among people, right? Because who can know? Behaviors are very easily measurable and observable. So what I hear Sally saying is, you know what, when you've got trying to build a communal norm, stick with the observable behavior. That's something we can measure and quantify and apply equally. Once you start to talk about internal states, it can start to get very messy. Beautiful. We're going to come back to that. Any other thoughts? Yes, Becca.
One thought that I had is, what if you're at a Seder and all you care about is getting to Shulchan Aruch? And so you eat the matzah, you eat the charoset, you go through all of those things, but you don't actually care. You wouldn't do it if it wasn't part of the Haggadah. If the Haggadah took it out, you wouldn't be doing it. Does it count as fulfilling the mitzvah?
Well, so it looks like, based on Shmuel's father, yeah, you ate matzah. Even if the only reason you ate the matzah was to get your aunt off your back who's eyeing you, why aren't you participating? Or the only reason you ate the matzah is because you're starving and no one fed you anything, whatever it might be. It seems even if you have zero interest in fulfilling the mitzvah, the defense of the position is you have indeed fulfilled that mitzvah. So if you decide to do tshuva 2 hours later and and you ask, do I have to eat matzah again with tremendous devotion? The answer is no. Let's take a look at another Pesach example. Yeah.
Before you get there, Robert asked in the chat, what about the mitzvah tzedakah? If a Jew who says that they don't believe in mitzvot or the Torah or God, nevertheless makes a donation to a chesedic organization, does that count as the fulfillment of a mitzvah?
Based on this, I mean, we're not going to go into the legal discussion, but the requirement of kavannah is a debate among the medieval commentators. And in most instances, we'll see in a minute, it's a machloket, it's a debate. The Shulchan Aruch brings both opinions. But based on what we're seeing, you fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah, regardless that you had zero interest in doing it for the sake of mitzvah. Moshe, you had a comment, then we're going to go on to the next example.
I have two things. One, how did you know that a demon didn't make you eat the matzah? That's my first question. And the second one is, we got a little hung up on kavannah and intent. So my intent, I go to shul to hear it, but my mind is wandering while it's going. So I'm hearing it. I had intent to hear it, but I'm not deep into it. So this definition of what intent means got us a little hung up.
Well, it should get you hung up because as Sally's comment kind of opened the door, it's very hard to define, right? How mindful do I have to be? How connected do I have to be? From our examples here, it seems the most basic level is I'm here to fulfill a commandment.
Okay.
Even if I'm distracted, even if it becomes a more interesting question. I have a very bad tendency to go off on tangents, but there's certain mitzvot, like prayer, for example, where intention might be everything. So you could argue that if you don't have intent to pray, then maybe you've done nothing at all. But these are behavioral things. And so presumably I'm there to hear the mitzvah of shofar. The fact while the shofar is blowing, I'm thinking about the stock market, that just probably makes me a more normal person. There's that joke that everyone likes to make that when A Jew prays, they're thinking about the stock market, and when they're at the stock market, they're praying.
So are you going to answer my first question?
Well, I guess you just sort of know the person's not in their right mind. They are acting like someone who's externally compelled.
No, but
And then when they come back to their senses,
a demon didn't make me eat the matzah. I did it on my own. And my question was, how did you know that a demon didn't make you eat it?
oh, how do any of us know if a demon's not making
Right.
us doing something? I guess we trust our own internal reports.
Okay.
I guess. I have no firsthand demon experience, so I'm a little limited in my answer to that question. But let's take a look at the next example here, because it's instructive also, and it also connects to eating. So the Mishnah again, the Mishnah describes a case in source 4 where they bring out lettuce before the meal, and you dip the lettuce. That's the karpas course at our Seder, where some people have celery, some people have parsley, some people have potato, and then they bring out the same lettuce with the Seder plate to use as maror. With the implication being, even though you ate the same lettuce, I know you Ashkenazic Jews out there use horseradish, I get that, but Talmudically the custom was with lettuce, even though lettuce isn't that bitter. It's an interesting question, but lettuce in the Talmud is what they use for bitter herbs. I'm sorry to tell you. So, in any event, the implication being is even though you ate the lettuce already, because at the time you ate it not for the intent of maror, of bitter herbs, but you ate it simply as a first course, a salad, you have to eat it again. Which is why Reish Lakish says, this is to say that mitzvot require kavannah, they require intent. Since one does not eat the lettuce at the time of his obligation to eat bitter herbs, he ate it after reciting the blessing of Borei Pri Adama, and he did not intend to fulfill his obligation to eat bitter herbs, therefore he has to do it again. For if it entered your mind, mitzvot don't require kavannah, why are you dipping twice? You already ate the lettuce. Meaning, if you already ate the lettuce once, why are you making me do it again? It must be because the first time I ate it, I was having a salad. And the second time I'm eating it as bitter herbs. And therefore, since mitzvot require intent, it's only if I eat the lettuce with the desire to fulfill the requirement to eat bitter herbs, does it count. And the Gemara, again, unbelievably so, gives this very forced answer to defend the position that says you don't need kavannah. Perhaps I can say mitzvot really don't require intent. Why do I need 2 dippings? So the children will ask questions. You're right. I may have fulfilled maror the first time around, but I'm going to dip twice so the children will wonder and ask what's going on. But again, as a child myself, I have to ask, why is the Gemara defending this position when it would seem religiously obvious that kavannah is certainly desirable? Why defend the position that mitzvot don't require kavannah? So I'm going to share with you a couple answers that I found, and we're going to see what you think. And then I'm going to suggest something of my own, which might not be as good. So the first one comes from a Sfat Emet, a Hasidic, 19th century Hasidic Rebbe who wrote a commentary on the Talmud. And this is what he said. It appears that indeed in every action of mitzvah, even done without kavannah, the doer accomplishes something great above. This is because this is how God designed things connecting the upper worlds to the lower worlds. Meaning, presumably, God set it up that these behaviors count. There's an automatic empathy or connection between what we do and the effects in the spiritual world, whether we're aware of it or not, whether we intend it or not. A Jew eats matzah and something up in heaven moves a little bit. A Jew hears the shofar blown and something moves in heaven a little bit. A Jew opens up their checkbook to tzedakah, regardless of their intention, and something moves in heaven a little bit. This is the Nike approach to mitzvot, which is just do it. Now, Shani, we will now get an endorsement for Nike for these shiurim. Is that correct? That's why I mentioned them. The idea that the behaviors count all on their own, right? That's the model here that's being suggested. That's the concept. The behaviors have a force on their own, either because, as Sally said, it binds the community together, or because this is a more mystical view, that's like a secret of the Torah. You do these things and good stuff happens whether a person intended it or not. That's the Nike approach. I'll give you another one which you may like either more or less. And this is the Chabad approach. Rav David Sperber was highly influenced by Chabad. By the way, for those of you who have heard of the famous Israeli scholar Daniel Sperber, this was his grandfather, who survived the Shoah and moved to Israel and died in the 1960s. Every living Jewish person has within them hidden love and fear of God in their heart as part of their connection to the Jewish people. Thus, even if they perform a mitzvah without intent or mindfulness, in any event, the act was performed from the depth of their heart through a divine power that sits hidden in their hearts, even if it is not revealed. Remember that guy who was in the car, who drove with his friend to shul because the friend wanted to hear shofar and he just wanted to sit in the car and chill out. He had no interest in going in. Aha! Deep, deep down, in the deepest recesses of their spiritual being, as a Jew, they really did want to hear shofar. They're not aware of it. They don't know it. But deep, deep down, underneath it all, the Pintele Yid, as many of us who know Yiddish grew up hearing that little Jewish spark that's in every Jew, that Jewish spark wanted to hear shofar. Now, the challenge with both of these approaches, I think, is one sort of assumes this mystical link that our behaviors matter no matter what we're thinking or doing, because that's how the Torah set it up. And the other, you could argue, could be seen as patronizing, right? That's what happens when a person says, no, I really don't want to hear shofar, and the deeply pious person at the kotel says, no, 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 deep down you really do. I know you better than you know yourself. That does not work with Pardes students at all. Most people don't like being told that a stranger knows them better than they know themselves. But what you have there, in a way, is a mystical answer to solve a mystical problem, right? Because who more than Jewish mystics believe that kavannah and intention and experience are so important, right? It's the mystical approach to Judaism that often emphasizes our kavannah. And here you have mysticism coming to the defense of why you don't really need kavannah. Because deep down, it's a mystical truth that is so deep, even if you're not aware of it, it's actually working. Look, you could take that or leave that. I think we could also throw in there the added benefit that kavannah is awfully hard to measure, right? Kavannah, who's to say who has kavannah? Who's to say that I have kavannah? As Moshe said, what happens? The shofar is blowing and I was thinking about something else. Did I really hear the shofar? They were reading Megillah, and halfway through I started thinking about my checklist for tomorrow. Did I really hear Megillah? So there's no question that a kavannah requirement is potentially playing with fire. And so I could understand practical reasons and not only mystical reasons about why one would want to take kavannah off the table, or at least neutralize it to some extent, because the anxiety it could generate of not knowing if I'm fulfilling the commandment could be very high. However, I want to suggest another approach, and it's built on something that I noticed. Talmudically speaking, the role of kavannah comes up primarily in regards to Rosh Hashana and Pesach. Those are where the two sugyot lie. And I thought to myself, what do Rosh Hashanah and Pesach have in common? Rosh Hashanah, at least rabbinically, is understood as the day God creates the world. It's also a day of judgment, but those two things are linked. Pesach is also a New Year's of a certain type. Nisan is the first month. It is the beginning, if you will, the birth of the Jewish people. So you have the birth of the world and the birth of the Jewish people. And both of those are in fact linked to Shabbat. Believe it or not, Shabbat is the link between Pesach and Rosh Hashanah. And I know you're thinking I'm nuts, so I'll show you the example in the text. As you may know or may not know, but I'm guessing you do know, that the Ten Commandments in Exodus and the version in Devarim and Deuteronomy have some subtle differences between them. And one of the differences that we find is the reason for Shabbat. Let's take a look. Over in Shmot, in Exodus, it says, after saying you have to keep Shabbat, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remember the Sabbath day, it then says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and hallowed it. Shabbat is a reminder of God creating the world. God rested on the seventh day of creation. God sanctified that day, and therefore Shabbat is plugged in to the first Shabbat of creation, which I think if most of us were asked biblically, that might be the reason that makes more sense. I'll ask you in a minute, but I think if you were about to receive the Ten Commandments and you were there, and Mark turns to Leslie and say, you know, there's a rumor we're going to have a Shabbat thing. Why do you think we're going to have to keep Shabbat? My guess is Leslie is going to say, Mark, we got Genesis already. Remember, God made the world in 6 days. Seventh day, God rested. Ask me something more difficult next time. And Mark would, being a gentleman, apologize. And then they would go on to discuss other very, very important matters. When we come to, I got it right. When we come to Dvarim, though, interestingly enough, the text says you have to observe Shabbat. Why? Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, the God is made you observe the Sabbath day. Shabbat is presented as a reminder that God took us out of Egypt. So I want to pause here for a moment and ask you, what is the link between those two things? You could just say, well, there is no link and they're completely different. But what might I argue that leaving Egypt and God creating the world and how that might tie into Shabbat, why would they be connected on some level? What are your thoughts? What is Shabbat meant to teach me? Yes, Elian.
What is the question again, please? Could you repeat it?
I'm happy to. What is the link between God creating the world and God taking the Jewish people out of Egypt? And how could Shabbat be seen as a reminder of both? Elian.
Well, I was going to say the first one in Exodus talks about basically the beginning of the whole world, just like Rosh Hashanah and Shabbat. And that is a situation in where they're really, on the people's side, there is no intent. It's happened and we're part of the result of that. Yet in Devarim, when it talks about the Lord taking us out of Egypt, people were present. So there's a more intentionality towards that observance of Shabbat.
Interesting. So you would argue, in fact, even though people technically are present at the first Shabbat, but just two of them, right? But I hear your point. But how might I see them as linked? Something popped up in the chat and I missed it. Shabbat, you're right. In Kiddush, we remember both. That is 100% correct. And we do incorporate both. How are they linked? How is God as creator of the world and God who took us out of Egypt? What's the link there? What are we saying in both of those instances? What are we saying?
Gratitude for things that have been done for us.
Absolutely a sense of gratitude, and gratitude for things that we could not do for ourselves, right? Both God as creator of the world and God as one who took us out of Egypt, both convey this sense of human limitation. In creation of the world, it's humanity's limitation. We did not self-create. God created the world. And in the case of the Jewish people in Egypt, we didn't redeem ourselves. God took us out. Both holidays, therefore, Rosh Hashanah and Pesach, can share this theme of limitation, which is expressed in Shabbat, right? One could argue the reason we don't do prohibited labor on Shabbat is because creative labor is all about humans fixing the world, perfecting the world, and asserting our control over the world. And one day a week, we desist from that, I think we can argue, to acknowledge that we are not the source of all creation and the world does not belong to us. The world has been given to us as a gift. Our lives have been given to us as a gift. And when we acknowledge our own limitation, we make that space for acknowledging God's role. They go hand in hand. The way we acknowledge God's role is by acknowledging our limitation. And in that sense, both Rosh Hashanah and Pesach share that Shabbat theme. God as the one who sets events into motion, and the requirement for us to acknowledge that. On Rosh Hashanah, God as the creator and ultimately judge of all creation. And on Pesach, God as the redeemer and in many ways the creator of the Jewish people. Now, why might this be connected to Kavanaugh? I would want to argue that Kavanaugh has within it a certain amount of human initiative that gets attached to the behavior, right? God gives us a mitzvah. God is the commander. God creates the world. God takes us out of Egypt. God commands. Now, God as commander can evoke two possible responses, I think. One is the Kavanaugh response, which says, I want to take an active role. I don't want to just perform this behavior, but I want to take an active role in shaping this behavior by exercising my internal state. I want to activate my fear of God, my love of God, my choice, my personality, and I want to respond to God as the commander and the creator by offering to become a partner in this commandment, by infusing it with my own personal covenant. Another response to mitzvot is one of submission. God, you command and I do. The behavior is in front of me and I'm going to simply do it because I'm going to submit to divine authority. Both of those themes are potential responses to God as creator and God as commander. One asks us to become partners, to cultivate our inner life, and respond to this divine command as an invitation to step up and demonstrate our ability to shape and control and influence by injecting our kavannah. And the other says, you know what? I want to put myself aside. I'm going to be present and submit my behavior to God's authority. I'm not going to look inward. I'm simply going to look upward and do what God is asking me to do. I think both of those religious responses are valuable. And I think the system of Jewish law cultivates both of them. On the one hand, I think we are strongly encouraged to cultivate our inner state and bring our personality and our emotional, intellectual life to these commandments. I think there is also an element of these commandments that is asking us to submit to something that is greater than we are. To see God as a commander, as a creator, and to acknowledge our limitation and to step into that role of one who is there to serve. And I think both of those temperaments are valuable, and both of them are suggested by Rosh Hashanah and Pesach at the same time. And I think the message of the Talmud is that we really do need both. We need to both cultivate ourselves as partners with God and bring our kavannah to the front. And we are also encouraged to notice our limitation and submit to God's will. And I would argue, and I know I have to finish, I've got 30 seconds, so I'm going to finish in 30 seconds. I think the situation that we are facing right now today as human beings and Jews really asks for both of those responses. On the one hand, our sense of control over our lives and our environment has been severely challenged. And if we keep fighting that all the time, we're going to make ourselves miserable, right? A piece of getting through this experience is acknowledging that this is bigger than we are. We are not in control of the world's biology. At the same time, oh, I like that comment, Robert, the Akeda, very nice. At the same time, we are not going to approach everything as a fait accompli, but we have to draw on our human resources to get through this situation with as much mental and physical health as we possibly can, and with as much kindness and generosity of spirit that we can bring. So I would say this time of year, we are challenged to cultivate both responses and to embrace them both, to cultivate our inner kavannah and also acknowledge our human limitation all at the same time. I finished on time. I want to thank all of you for your time. And if anybody has comments, oh, Robert is just flowing with Torah here in the chat. I encourage you to check it out. But I'm going to finish on time. If anybody wants to email me or carry on the conversation, I would love to hear from you. And I'm sorry we didn't have more time to hear from you, but I'm just so happy to see all your lovely faces, and thank you.